I've come to understand that silence can be the loudest sound in the world. It was a silence that followed my husband's final words, not the roar of a storm, but the slow, suffocating stillness of a life being dismantled. My name is Dolores, and I am 68 years old. My husband, Robert, 72, had always been the quiet strength of our home, a man of few words, but profound actions. For 45 years, he built our life brick by brick, from the small, unassuming house on the corner of Elm Street to the successful construction business that bore our name. His hands, once strong and calloused, now trembled slightly, a testament to a life of hard labor and unwavering dedication. This story begins on a Tuesday, an ordinary afternoon that would splinter my reality into a before and after. I had spent the morning carefully preparing Robert's favorite lemon cake, a tradition I'd upheld since our first anniversary. He'd been ill for months, a slow, debilitating heart condition that had stripped him of his vigor and left him dependent on me. His nurse, a woman named Tiffany, was a young, vibrant blonde in her late 30s. I had hired her because she was efficient and seemed genuinely dedicated. She was always smiling and laughing, a stark contrast to the grim reality that was slowly consuming my husband and me. I had foolishly grown to trust her, to see her as a beacon of light in our dark world. I walked into the living room, a warm slice of cake on a plate, ready to share a moment of quiet solace with the man I had dedicated my life to. But the words that came from his mouth were a brutal, unforgiving blow that hit me with the force of a physical punch. They were not whispered, they were delivered with a cold, almost cruel finality. "Dolores," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "I'm leaving you." My heart stopped. I felt a cold dread seeping into my bones. "I'm leaving you," he repeated, "for Tiffany." My mind reeled. The absurdity of it all was a bizarre, tragic farce. Here he was, a frail, elderly man who could barely walk to the bathroom on his own, declaring his intention to leave me, his wife of nearly 5 decades, for a woman young enough to be his granddaughter. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, frozen, the plate with the lemon cake slipping from my numb fingers, shattering on the polished wood floor. The crash echoed through the house, a violent punctuation to his callous declaration. He rose slowly from his armchair, his movements stiff and deliberate, not of an elderly man, but of a stranger. "I am leaving," he said, and with that, he walked out of the house. I could hear the sound of a car pulling away, and then a profound, terrifying silence settled over my life. The world I had so meticulously built with him, every memory, every shared dream, every sacrifice, had been reduced to a pile of broken glass and a cold slice of lemon cake. I looked down at the mess on the floor and then up at the empty doorway. He had left. Just like that. After all the years, all the love, all the sacrifices, he had just left, and for Tiffany, a woman who had only been in our lives for a few months. But what they, in their endless arrogance, did not grasp was this: I, Dolores, was not a frail old woman. I might have looked like a discarded piece of old furniture, but my will was stronger than any lock. He had chosen to forget our shared past, the sweat and prayers that had built our life, the sacrifices I had made, going without heat in the winter, working a second job when the bank threatened foreclosure. I had given everything, and they had taken it all without a second thought, without a shred of guilt. I didn't try to stop them. I didn't beg, plead, or cry. I simply stood there in the silence, watching my world crumble. A profound coldness rose from my stomach, spreading through my veins. It was the icy calm of a woman who was no longer just sad, but was now filled with a quiet, meticulous rage. He thought he was leaving me with nothing, but in their boundless arrogance, they both forgot one crucial detail. They had taken everything, but I still had the power to take it all back. And I would. The house, once a fortress of our shared life, now felt like a mausoleum. Robert's departure left a gaping void, a profound silence that settled over everything. The scent of his pipe tobacco was gone, replaced by the faint, antiseptic smell of cleaning products that Tiffany had introduced. Every object, every piece of furniture, seemed to taunt me with memories of a life that no longer existed. My days, once filled with the rhythm of caring for my husband, now stretched out in an empty, agonizing monotony. I would sit for hours in the living room, staring at the empty armchair where he used to read, my mind a storm of questions. Why? How could he? Was our entire life together a lie? The betrayal was a constant, gnawing ache in my chest. It wasn't just that he had left, it was the sheer, brutal arrogance of it. They believed I was a frail, helpless old woman, a quiet relic who would simply wither away. They thought they had secured their future by discarding me, but they had not considered one crucial detail. I still had the deed to the entire damn house. While they were clinking wine glasses and whispering about me being a burden, I wasn't just fuming. I was meticulously crafting a quiet, paper-shuffling kind of revenge. The kind that doesn't announce its arrival with a knock, but with a signature. He had always been the one who handled the finances. He managed our joint accounts, the investments, the rental properties. But in his haste, he had forgotten that my name was on everything. All of it. The bank accounts, the investments, the properties, they were all in both of our names. He had left me with a seemingly empty house, but he had also left me with the keys to our entire financial empire. I had lived a life of unwavering self-sacrifice, woven into the very fabric of my being. I had trimmed my savings account to put him through college, sacrificed my personal time to ensure he had everything he needed. I had even refinanced my house to give them a down payment on their house. He had never repaid me, not a dollar, not even a thank you. He never knew that I had sold my engagement ring to pay for his college. Now, with a new, cold clarity, I began to see our relationship for what it truly was. I had been a mother, a grandmother, a caretaker, the glue. But I had also been an ATM, a source of funds they could access with a simple call, a text message, or a casual request. The silence had taught me that giving without limits only teaches others to leave without guilt. My quiet nature, my enduring patience, they mistook it for weakness. One day, as I was packing some old things, I found a box of old documents. Inside, there were papers with Robert's signature and mine. Among them, a business card for a lawyer, Miss Eleanor Vance. The same woman who had helped me with my will years ago. I had never used her since then, but I kept her card. I called her that very afternoon. She was surprised to hear from me, but her voice was as firm and professional as I remembered. I need to talk to you about a divorce, I told her, my voice surprisingly steady. And the division of assets. Of course, Dolores, she said. We can set up an appointment for next week. I'll need all the financial documents you have. There is something else, I said. I want to sell the house. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Are you sure? She asked. I'm absolutely sure, I said. I want to start a new life without them. And so began my quiet, methodical plan. While they were living in their delusion of a blissful future, I was quietly dismantling everything they thought they had. I was no longer the woman who had baked oatmeal raisin cookies and knitted sweaters. I was no longer the woman who would sacrifice her own needs for the sake of her family. I was a woman who was done with being taken for granted. The silence that had settled over my life was not the silence of defeat, but the quiet, purposeful hum of a machine being put into motion. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and quiet resolve. Eleanor, my lawyer, was a woman of efficiency and few words. She listened to my story without judgment, her face a mask of professional calm. She simply took notes and outlined a plan that felt both ruthless and liberating. The first step was to initiate divorce proceedings, but the true masterstroke was a move that would leave them utterly bewildered, a lien on all of our shared assets. This meant that nothing could be sold, no money could be moved, without my explicit permission. Meanwhile, Robert and Tiffany were living in their own blissful ignorance. They were living in the grand illusion of their future, oblivious to the fact that their foundation was being dismantled, brick by brick. My phone, which had once been a constant companion, was now eerily silent. He didn't call to check on me, didn't ask how I was doing. All the calls were either from Tiffany or Robert, their voices strained with an artificial cheerfulness, a thinly veiled attempt to distract me from the cold fact of their betrayal. The only topic of conversation was how they needed money for various investments. One day, Tiffany called me, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Dolores, she purred, Robert, and I found the most wonderful place. A little cottage by the lake. We just need a little help with the down payment. I could hear the mocking laughter in her voice, a silent echo of the words I had overheard him say, Mom, the ATM, unlimited withdrawals. The arrogance of it was a slap in the face. They had moved out of my house, but they still thought they could use me as their personal piggy bank. But the real insult came when they tried to sell our rental properties without my consent. Robert had always managed them, and in his haste, he had forgotten that my name was on the deeds. He called me in a panic, his voice a mixture of anger and disbelief. Dolores, he said, I don't understand. The bank says you have to sign. I simply told him, I will not sign anything until I have a full accounting of all of our shared assets. He sputtered, he cursed, he threatened legal action, but I remained firm. It was during this time that I started to see the signs of financial trouble. They were small at first. A credit card bill that went unpaid, a car payment that was a few days late. Then they began to escalate. The bank called me to ask about a missed mortgage payment on one of the rental properties. Robert called me, not to apologize, but to demand I pay it. I refused. I told him that I was no longer his personal financial support system and that he needed to start taking responsibility for his own life. The humiliation was a slow, agonizing burn, but it was nothing compared to the quiet satisfaction of watching their meticulously crafted world begin to unravel. They were so consumed by their own arrogance, their own greed, that they failed to see the quiet, methodical storm I was brewing in the background. My revenge was not loud or dramatic. It was a silent storm, a paper-shuffling, signature-wielding kind of revenge that they would not see coming until it was too late. It was all because they had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. They had taken my kindness for granted, and now they would pay the price. And that price was a lifetime of their arrogant mistakes. The battle for control of our assets was not a war of words, but a silent war of attrition, fought with legal documents and financial paperwork. Every attempt Robert made to sell our properties or access our joint accounts was met with the cold, unyielding wall of a lien I had placed on everything. The bank, confused and frustrated, simply referred him to me or to my lawyer, Eleanor. Robert, in a fit of rage, hired his own lawyer, a man named Mr. Hamilton, a blustering, loud man who was no match for Eleanor's quiet, steely resolve. The legal letters flew back and forth, but they were all in vain. I had already made my move. They were so consumed by their own arrogance, their own greed, that they failed to see the quiet, methodical storm I was brewing in the background. My revenge was not loud or dramatic. It was a silent storm, a paper-shuffling, signature-wielding kind of revenge that they would not see coming until it was too late. I was no longer the woman who had baked oatmeal raisin cookies and knitted sweaters. I was a woman who was done with being taken for granted. The silence that had settled over my life was not the silence of defeat, but the quiet, purposeful hum of a machine being put into motion. One afternoon, I was sitting in my living room when the doorbell rang. It was Robert, his face a mask of weary anger. Dolores, he said, his voice strained, we need to talk. I let him in, but I did not offer him a seat. I stood tall, my back straight, a silent, unyielding presence. The bank has frozen all our accounts, he said, and they won't release the funds for the property sales. They say you've put a lien on everything. I have, I said calmly. And I have no intention of removing it until I have a full accounting of all of our shared assets. He slumped back, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. Dolores, he said, what are you doing? This is madness. You're ruining us. I smiled, a cold, bitter smile that did not reach my eyes. I am not ruining you, Robert, I said. You and Tiffany have done a fine job of that yourselves. I am simply making sure that you do not take what is mine. He left in a huff, and a few days later, a letter arrived from his lawyer, offering a compromise. I simply laughed and had Eleanor send a one-line reply, no. The final blow came when they tried to sell my house. He had forgotten that I had never signed over the deed to him. The house, which had been in my family for generations, was still in my name. Robert called me, his voice a mixture of pleading and anger. Dolores, he said, I have a buyer for the house. You have to sign. We need the money." I simply told him no. And with that, I hung up. He was a man who had everything, but in his greed and arrogance, he had thrown it all away for a woman who would not hesitate to do the same to him. I went to my lawyer's office, not to sign papers for their benefit, but to sign the final papers for the sale of my house to a cash buyer. I had a long conversation with Eleanor, and she offered me a piece of advice. "Dolores," she said, "you're finally free." I just nodded, a strange sense of peace settling over me. The old Dolores, the one who sacrificed everything for her family, was gone. And in her place was a new woman, a woman with a new purpose, a woman who had finally learned to put herself first. The phone began to ring 3 days later. First, it was my son, Robert. I ignored the call. Then came his voice message, "Mom, I know you're in there. I just want to talk. I know you've done something with the will." But I didn't answer. I no longer needed their apologies. I needed to move on, to become someone else. I no longer had to answer their calls, no longer had to pretend that everything was fine. I had finally found the courage to put myself first, and it felt so liberating. The silence that followed their calls was deafening, but it was a comfortable silence. It was a sound I had not heard in years, a sound of peace. I began to live for myself. I went back to church, where my old friends welcomed me back with open arms. I volunteered at the local community center. I even took an art class I had always wanted to take but never had the time or money for. My life, which had once been a constant whirlwind of taking care of others, was now a calm, peaceful river. Robert and Tiffany, on the other hand, were slowly sinking. Their attempts to sell our shared properties failed, their legal threats were dismissed by Eleanor, and their credit was a ticking time bomb. They were forced to sell Tiffany's car and, eventually, their beautiful lakeside cottage. The irony was not lost on me. He had left me for a younger woman, and now my revenge left them penniless. Not because I was vindictive, but because they had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. They had taken my kindness for granted, and now they would pay the price. And that price was a lifetime of their arrogant mistakes. The final act of my revenge was not to destroy them, but to rebuild myself. I did not sell the house. I turned it into a sanctuary for women who had gone through similar experiences, a place where they could heal, find their strength, and start over. I called it the Dolores Foundation. The foundation would provide them with legal counsel, financial advice, and a community of women who understood their pain. One day, as I was walking through the house, I saw a framed photograph of Robert and me on a picnic. We were both smiling. He looked so happy, so proud. I picked up the frame, carefully removed the photo from beneath the shards. Strange, no tears came. There was an emptiness within and a peculiar sense of relief. It was as if a long-festering wound had finally burst, releasing all its poison. An hour later, my doorbell rang. It was my daughter, Sarah. She had found out about my separation from Robert and the financial issues they were facing. She came with her kids and told me she was not here for money but to be with me. We sat on the front porch, drinking tea. My daughter's face was filled with so much sorrow. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she said. I didn't know. I simply smiled. "It's all right, honey," I said. Sometimes, the hardest lessons are the most important. And for the first time in my life, I'm finally living for myself. My revenge was not cruel. It was merely a mirror, reflecting their own actions back at them with a perfect crystalline clarity. I had not destroyed them. I had simply chosen to live, to be happy, to be at peace, and it was a revenge that was far more satisfying than any financial ruin. They thought they had left me with nothing, but in the end, it was I who had taken back my life, my dignity, my strength. And that, my dear, is priceless.